Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm enjoying your presence. And I'm a Baptist. Have I lost the room now? Are we still friends? I feel like a lion in a den of Daniels. I have a lot of respect for the Anglican Church and particularly this diocese doing so many incredible things. So it's lovely to be with you. I had two strange experiences coming here today. The first one was as I drove up here, I recognised the building. And I remember we had a meeting above the cafe about 6 years ago. And it was a meeting between the Evangelical Alliance, Care for the Family, and the Church's Child Protection Advisory Service. And we were deciding whether there needed to be a charity that would champion the needs of vulnerable children to the church. And it was in that upper room that we decided, yes, someone needed to do it. And Care for the Family weren't set up to do it. Evangelical Alliance wasn't set up to do it. Neither were the Church's Child Protection Advisory Service. And so we started Home for Good. And we dreamt up the vehicle that it would be in that upper room. So I didn't know I was coming back here today when I kind of got in the car. So that was pretty cool. The second thing that happened, context may be a bit weird. I was just leaving the men's toilet and someone said, look, because of what Home for Good is doing, our family are fostering an unaccompanied asylum seeker child. In fact, a teenager. And it's been really tough, but actually it's been really amazing. And I thought, praise God, this message that God cares about the most vulnerable children in our nation and the church is part of the solution, it's spreading. So you've already encouraged me even before we've begun. Just so that you know, I won't talk much about Home for Good today, but we've been giving you out leaflets so that you can find out more about our work. We have someone here. Do you want to stand up, Dave? Dave is based in Bath, and he is our Home for Good kind of area coordinator. And was that me? You have your own soundtrack, Dave. That's brilliant. So if you care about vulnerable children, if you want to see the church doing good in its community, then please talk to Dave. If you don't catch him today, then the numbers are here, how you can hear from him. He is focused on Bath, so he's particularly interested in meeting Bath people, but the rest of the diocese is also welcome to engage. Thanks, Dave. Right, okay, so here's my topic, making new disciples. I wonder if you're able to stand. Could we all just stand up for a second? And I'm going to ask, I don't know the answer to this question, so this is genuinely a bit of research, okay? If you were not born and brought up in a Christian family, would you, if you were not brought up in a Christian family, would you remain standing and would the rest of us sit down? If you were not born and brought up in a Christian family, you should be standing now. So if I'm right, you are first generation Christians, is that right? Somehow, through the gospel getting to you, through someone being brave, you were brought to faith. Is that right? Excellent. Thank you for standing. Keep standing for a second more. If it was through a friend or a family member that you were brought to faith, could you remain standing? Okay. If it was for a friend or a family member, could you remain standing? Okay, so the majority of people who were converted in this room, not from a Christian family, it was through a friend or a family member sharing faith. Is that right? Interesting. Brilliant. Please have a seat. Actually, we should give those people a round of applause. Someone told me the other day that there is a really easy way for the church to grow. Because Christians tend to have more children than the wider culture, all we need to do is to make sure that our children grow up to be Christians. Does that make sense? And yet, our numbers are declining, aren't they? Some of that has to do with the fact that we've got a titanic problem when it comes to discipling our young people. I hope that part of your strategy, engaging the younger generation, that's got to be a priority, but I think it starts in the church. At the moment, according to the best stats I can find, 70% of the young people that are brought up in the church don't stay Christian into their adult and teenage years. So we're losing 70%. That's a big problem, isn't it? Imagine that the youth group from your church goes away for the weekend in a minibus. And if you're a parent, you're waiting in the church car park. And, they were supposed to be back by 5. It's 7, and there's no sign of them. And then the minibus appears, and the youth leader goes, "Guys, got good news and bad news. I've lost 70% of the young people, but the 30%, they're still here." You would see we had a major problem, wouldn't you? 70%. So making sure that we disciple our young people is a great way that the church can actually grow and outpopulate our nation. But actually, this is not just about maintenance, isn't it? It's not just make sure that we've got enough people in the pews or enough people on the rotas or enough money to keep the churches going. We had another commission that wasn't just about making sure the church survives. Here was the mission we were given. This is a very famous theologian. This is Krish. He says, "The New Testament was written by disciples, for disciples, to make disciples. Yet our emphasis has been on making decisions, claiming converts, making Christians." Where does that idea that we were supposed to be making new disciples come from? This is Matthew chapter 28, probably the go-to passage. I hope you've been thinking about it a lot today as Jesus kind of summarizes the mission of the church. I want to talk us through it, I guess a bit theologically and a bit practically, to see if we can get inspired so that we can make new disciples through our ministry. So Jesus says this: "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So what's happened? Jesus has lived the life that he should have lived. He died on the cross. And then he was raised from the dead. And just before he ascends to heaven, Jesus gives the church its task. And there were 11 disciples. Remember it says, and even then, some doubted. They were a ragtag bunch. If I was choosing a group of people to hold on to the mission for bringing the gospel to the nations, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have chosen any of those 11. They looked like misfits from The Apprentice. If you track through Matthew's gospel, and this is the last bit of Matthew's gospel, almost every opportunity they have to fail, the disciples fail. Jesus predicts he's going to die on the cross. The next thing the disciples do is argue about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. Jesus says, "Can you feed these people?" He says, "No, I've got no chance of doing that." So every time Peter is told, "Who do you say I am, Peter? You're the Christ." Brilliant. Well, Peter, I've got to tell you, I'm going to go and die on a cross. To which Peter says, "No, Lord." And then Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." Peter goes from being the star pupil to being inhabited by Satan himself. That's a pretty rubbish thing for your CV, isn't it? I don't know, in your ministerial applications, Mr. Chris, being called Satan by the Son of God, is that one of the included references that you're looking for? So from, hero to zero in 2 sentences, everything they get wrong. And yet Jesus stands and he commissions these disciples. "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go." I think one of the major problems we have when it comes to sharing our faith at this moment in the nation is a lack of confidence. We're actually nervous about being outed as Christians because we're worried about all the negative assumptions. Remember, it was lovely hearing that testimony from Sally. What did I think of Christians? Well, I thought they were right-wing. I thought they were homophobic. There was a study done by the Barna Group in the US asking 16 to 34-year-olds, what do you think about Christians? Number one thing, homophobic. Second thing, hypocritical. Third thing was arrogance. That's the brand consciousness of Christianity in America. I don't think it's radically different here. In fact, partly because of the American elections, people think we all love Trump if we are connected with the church. Now, there may be Trump supporters here. I have no preference. Actually, I do. I can't do it. I do. I'm sorry. White evangelicals are making life really difficult for the global church, aren't they? Now, if you have a brand problem, there are two different solutions you can take. One is modelled by KFC. Do you know what KFC stands for? Kentucky Fried Chicken. There was a rebrand done in the 80s when people started to realise eating loads of saturated fats is really bad for you. So KFC thought, hold on, we've got a brand problem. We keep saying the word fried every time anyone mentions our name. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll just rebrand and we'll become KFC. Job done. Do you know the menu now in a KFC is worse than a menu in the 80s? There's this double Super Daddy Zinger Tower Burger that has more calories than a small village needs to survive for a week. So KFC's model was what? Change the name, keep business as usual. Just better logo, nicer design for the shops, but the same products. You with me? The other brand that had a problem in the 80s, and I had a problem with this because my dad bought one, was a car called a Skoda. Can you remember that? Do you know any Skoda jokes? What do you call a Skoda with two exhaust pipes? A wheelbarrow. How do you double the price of a Skoda? Fill it up with petrol. Why does a Skoda have a heated rear windscreen? Keep your hands warm when you're pushing it. That was not a good brand. My dad bought one just in my kind of key dating years. Thank you, Father. I mean, he helped me to be a celibate young man. That was great. Maybe it was his discipleship tool. But Skoda's brand problem, actually, they didn't change the name. The Skoda's still called a Skoda. But what did they change? What they were actually delivering. Are you with me? It's now a great car. If you own a Skoda, they're not telling Skoda jokes at school anymore. I've tried this out on my children. I have a lot of children. And my 19-year-old hadn't heard a Skoda joke, and my 5-year-old hadn't heard a Skoda joke. So a whole generation don't know Skoda jokes because people improved what they were delivering. What was Jesus's brand awareness? What did even his enemies say about him? Do you know what they called him? They called him a friend of sinners. Friend of sinners. And that was supposed to be a badge of shame. But he embraced it, didn't he? He delighted in it. He told parables to celebrate that he was all about demonstrating the grace of God to those that needed it most. What's our brand presence? Homophobic, judgmental, hypocritical, arrogant. How do we change how people perceive Christianity? We become more Christ-like. That's why discipleship matters. Are you with me? All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me, therefore go. Now think about those disciples. Some people like Leslie Newbegin think they were probably teenagers. They're all Jewish young men, and they probably hadn't stepped foot outside of, well, some of them had been to Samaria, but they haven't really stepped foot. They hadn't gone on kind of global mission programs around the world. They hadn't done an exchange program to another culture. But Jesus stands them on a mountain and says, go. Go where? Go everywhere. Or even to those dirty Gentiles that we've been told to hate since we were boys. Yes, go to the nations. Well, what is it that's going to transform these frightened young men into the kind of people that would turn the world upside down? Well, part of it is this commission from Jesus. All authority has been given to me. That's Jesus stating his omnipotence, isn't it? I'm the most powerful being in the universe. I have all authority at my disposal. You've seen it in a little bit, haven't you? You've seen me command the waves. You've seen me raise the dead. You've seen me turn water into wine. You've seen me multiply the food. You know the authority I've got, but now all authority is given to me. And therefore, you go. That's a weird bit of delegation, isn't it? Jesus, you're the most powerful person in the universe. Why are we going? Why don't you go? That would make a lot more sense. Well, you go with my delegated authority. That's why you go. I used to live in Warwick. Up in the Midlands, and there was a friend of mine in our congregation. Her name was Catherine Morgan, and I really wish she'd been from Glamorgan, but that would be an embellishment to this story that I wouldn't be allowed to add. But she was a police officer, and you might not be able to tell this at this moment, but I am really short. Okay, I'm on a crazy huge stage, 6 foot above contradiction, but I'm really short. But Catherine Morgan was shorter. And there was one night that the rugby club had this huge party. And the noise from the party was so loud that people in a kind of 3-block radius couldn't hear their television sets. And so they call in the police force. And Catherine Morgan gets out of the squad car and she goes up to the door of the rugby club and she knocks on it. And I'm going, hang on, what is going to happen? You're tiny. This huge man's going to come out, probably inebriated. It's probably built like an outside lavatory. This is not going to go well. But she knocks. What does she say as she knocks? Open up. Open up in the name of Catherine Morgan, who could have been from Glamorgan. No, open up in the name of the law. Because invisibly behind her is the whole weight of the British legal system, isn't it? You're not just taking on one person. You're taking on the whole British legal system if you mess with her. And therefore she stood with confidence. She could take whatever they threw at her. Now we, the church, do we realise that we've been commissioned and authorised by Jesus to go to the nations and make new disciples? Because if we did, we wouldn't be afraid of anything. So what? People think a bit weirdly about us. Sometimes people start using persecution language about the church in the UK. I refuse to use that language. Because if you've spent time with someone from Pakistan or South Sudan, those are the people that can talk about persecution. We might be able to talk about marginalisation. But who said we were supposed to be running the place anyway? Weren't we going to be leavening the dough? Weren't we going to be light in the darkness? Weren't we going to be sheep amongst wolves? Who said we were going to be running the place anyway? And so invisibly behind us, when we dare to open our mouths for the gospel, Jesus stands. And he says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go. So we're Christ authorized to make new disciples. But do you see, it's intentional. I mean, I've had some great moments when I was a pastor, when I was just doing my stuff as a pastor in the church office, and then someone would knock on the door and they had a problem that I could help with. That's brilliant. But actually, if the disciples had just waited for people to come to them, the gospel wouldn't have got to the nations. It might have got to Jerusalem and Judea, but it's not going to get to Samaria and the ends of the earth that way, is it? Therefore, go cross some boundaries. Get out. Now, again, one of the things I love about the Anglican Church is you have the parish model. And people do come knocking on your door, don't they? Weddings and funerals and baptisms. And even though we disagree about the theology of baptism, what an amazing opportunity it is at these high points in people's lives to introduce them to Jesus. You've got, some of you are sitting on beautiful buildings and people want to be baptized or buried or married in that building. Great. Use it. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. But use it for gospel purposes. How can you help someone that's at a really key moment in their life to encounter Jesus? What could you do? I've heard of people that when people come to their churches for marriages, they said, okay, but here are some of the things that we would need you to do. And it includes a marriage preparation course that's Christ-focused, that will help people understand what it means to embark on Christian marriage. You want to get married in the church? You take Christian marriage seriously? Let's talk that through with you. And people come to faith at those moments. That's brilliant. But that isn't the total task, just to wait and see if people will come to us. Therefore, go. We need to cross some boundaries. We're supposed to be intentional about it. We're also supposed to be international. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? Because had the job been finished in Israel and Judea, was everyone evangelized? No. Some people say we don't need to think about global mission because there's enough work to be done here. Actually, from the very beginning, there both needed to be work done here and the world needed to be reached. It needs to be both and. And one of the great things about the Anglican community, I could become an Anglican today. I don't know if that's physically possible. Apparently bishops can do amazing things with their fingers. But but you've got, 85 million people that are part of your denomination globally? And some of them have learnt things about what it means to be faithful to our God in unbelievable difficult circumstances that we need in our country. And so there's been a growing trend of what we call reverse mission. That it's not just about us going there, but actually mission is everywhere to everywhere. And so some of us might want to welcome believers that have toughed it out in some really hard places into our parishes to help revitalise the mission that we're on. But it's got to be both intentional and international. It's also ecclesial, so it says baptising them. Baptising them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Baptism was the entry point into the church. It strikes me that a lot of our evangelistic tools and campaigns across our nation kind of bypass the church. We'll get a parachurch organisation to do it, and as long as people make a decision at the end, job done. But actually that wasn't the plan, wasn't it? It wasn't conversions, it was disciples that we're supposed to be making, and the church is the place where disciples are supposed to be made. So we can partner with these other agencies and other groups, but the church is an important part of it and an element of it. One of my favourite metaphors for what it means to become a Christian is a forgotten metaphor in the church. It's adoption. You know, you're an adopted person. That matters to me. I run an adoption and fostering charity. But even if you park that for a minute, becoming a Christian is not just a transaction of changing your final destination. Becoming a Christian is taking on a new identity. Once you were a slave, and now you are a son and daughter of the living God. Once you were estranged, and now you are part of the family of God. Once you had no hope, now you have an inheritance. Once you were far off from God, and now God calls you his precious child. And so the church as a family that welcomes new members in, that's not a bad picture, is it? Adoption is our heritage. And so you won't want to see a newborn child isolated out there in the world on their own. You'd want to see them nurtured and flourishing within a family. Well, that's what happens. You become a Christian, you're born again, you need to be nurtured in the family of God. That's why we gather, isn't it? To nurture one another. I think I've got time to do this. It's interesting that it's in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. John does a version of the Great Commission speech in John chapter 20. And the disciples are locked in for fear of the Jews. And then Jesus stood among them and he says, peace be with you. And then he says it again, peace be with you. So shalom has been accomplished. And then he says, as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. That's John chapter 20. That's John's version of Matthew 28, if you like. Now, for me, that's really interesting because that's what's going on here in Matthew 28. As I have discipled you, so now you go and disciple the nations. Or as John wants to put it, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. And with that, he breathes on them and tells them to receive the Holy Spirit. Can you see the parallels that are happening in this passage? Matthew 28, John chapter 20. Same concepts, just different words to express it. We are part of a ripple effect that began on that day when Jesus stood on the mountain and commanded his disciples to go to the nations. And actually that ripple effect started in eternity past when God said, I'm sending my Son into the world. And the Son says, I'm willing to go in the power of the Spirit. You know, we don't talk about missions anymore. We talk about mission because there's only one mission. It's the mission of God that was originated in eternity past, where God sets his Son into the world and then he comes, he does the unique part that only he can do, and then he sends his church. So between these disciples here on this mountain and you, there's been an unbroken chain, hasn't there? There's been people faithfully, courageously passing the gospel on generation to generation, crossing continents and boundaries in order that the gospel would come to you. This struck me when I was a teenager. I was called to be in the inter-school Olympic Games. There's a big word, Olympic Games, but it was just Brighton schools. And I was called to run the glory leg of the 4x100 metre relay race. Do you know which the glory leg is? It's the last one, isn't it? Because I was going to be the one that gets there first, breaks the tape to the adulation of the crowd. And then my other teammates, because I'd run such a good leg, they were going to parade me around the stadium. And my picture would be in the Brighton Evening Argus. That was the plan. So I'm standing in lane 4, arm outstretched, ready to receive the baton. Bang goes the starter's pistol. Robert Bellis is in lane 1 and he runs a brilliant leg. He hands on to Justin Taylor. Justin Taylor is running so fast you can only just see a blur where there should be legs. It's like Roadrunner. It was amazing. And then he hands on to Martin Batchelor and he's running a brilliant leg and he's running so fast that his cheeks are being pulled back by the wind resistance. It was just amazing. And I'm standing in lane 4 ready to receive the baton and then Martin runs past me in lane 3. I didn't cross the tape first. I hope I didn't have my picture in the Brighton Evening Argus. But it was a disaster, wasn't it? All that running, all that transitioning, all that faithful passing on. And then when it was on my watch, when it was in my responsibility, I messed it up. And you think, here it is. This is the origin story of our churches, isn't it? There'd be no church in the Diocese of Bristol if those disciples hadn't faithfully, and at expense to their own safety, many of them died to make it possible, they faithfully passed the gospel on, and it came to us. And what are we going to do? This is our moment. Will we be sent by the Father in the likeness of the Son and in the power of the Spirit, pass the gospel on to the next generation? Because if we don't, then we've failed God's calling. Whatever else we've done, we've failed it. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey. Some people think that all you need to do to become a Christian is say a kind of 4-sentence prayer and you're in. That we try to give people the minimum amount of truth. That's the plan. Minimum amount of truth, most amount of people. That wasn't Jesus' model of making disciples. Teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. That's our task, isn't it? I don't know how often you survey the teaching menu of your church. Do you think at the end of your ministry you'll be able to say, yeah, I did it. I taught them to obey everything that Jesus taught. You know, I've covered all the areas that he wanted me to cover. I haven't reduced the gospel down. I haven't made it just suit this culture. I've faithfully taught everything I was supposed to teach. You see, the gospel is not a kind of get out of hell free card. It's not just a kind of magic spell that we recount and then we'll go to heaven. No, the gospel is a transformative message that changes everything about us. Think about the ways that Jesus challenged disciples to live radically. That's our task. And so we call people to full-blooded, costly discipleship. Sometimes in order to kind of make our message more palatable, we dumb it down and we make it as easy as possible. You don't have to do much to become a Christian. You just need to pray a prayer now and you can know that you're going to go and be with Jesus forever. That's not what Jesus said. Jesus called his disciples to be willing to come and die for him. He asked the rich young ruler to sell everything he had and give it to the poor. He challenged his disciples that on the day of judgment, the way you know that you're in the kingdom is not whether you prayed a prayer in church. It's not even the amount of water that you were dunked in or sprinkled on. Do you remember in Matthew 25, just 3 chapters before this? Jesus says, on the day of judgment, I'll separate the sheep from the goats. And what will be the differentiator between those that are welcomed into the kingdom and those that are sent away? Church attendance, members of the PCC, ordination, doctrinal confession. None of the above, although all of those things are important. What was the differentiator? Jesus said, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. Jesus said, I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. Jesus said, I was a stranger and you welcomed me in. In other words, becoming a Christian is not just a change of mindset, it's a change of behavior and attitudes and values and vision, isn't it? That if the gospel hasn't changed the way that you treat the vulnerable, then the gospel hasn't come to you, says Jesus. Is that fair? Does that make sense? You're going, Krish, we're not sure about Matthew's gospel, it's a bit dodgy. Actually, no one's saying that, are you? You're good Anglicans. We like Gospels. The mark that you've received the grace of God is it begins to transform everything about us, and that includes how we relate to the poor. If we haven't, and everyone was surprised in that Matthew 25 moment, weren't they? They go, Jesus, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger? And Jesus said, whatever you didn't do for the least of these, you didn't do for me. Depart to eternal punishment. Heavy stuff. And so when Jesus says, teaching them to obey, he says, I want you to lay it out before people. Not just the easy believism that says, put your hand up, come to the front and it's all done. No, you need to warn people that they need saving from their sin, but they also need to confess me as Lord. And that's Lord over the whole of our lives, not just Sunday mornings, not just Thursday nights, but absolutely every centimetre of our body, every second of our day, we give over to the Lordship of Christ. It's a hard task. Teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, and surely I am with you to the very end of the age. I love it that Jesus promises us his presence. So when you're in that moment when you're not sure whether to go public about your faith or not, Jesus says, I am with you. And I'm with you until the very end of the age, because our task as evangelists is not finished until the end of the age. And so this task is to the ends of the earth and also to the end of the world, isn't it? It's an incredible task. Now, how can you, as clergy and staff and PCC members, how can you change the way that the church is so that we're more like Jesus' picture of mission than maybe we are at the moment? How can we change it? I have a couple of ideas for you. First of all, one of the jobs that we have as leaders is to model it. If we don't have any non-Christian people in our lives we're regularly open with our faith about, it's really difficult for us to ask the church to do it. Is that fair? And I know it's hard. If you're in full-time Christian paid ministry, then your natural group of people are going to be other Christians. You're going to be sucked into meetings and infrastructure. And so how are you going to make time? You have to be deliberate to model that you care about people that aren't part of your church and that you're regularly open about it. I heard about 2 pastors in the States that took a radical decision in order to do that. They had big churches, but they felt they had nothing to say to their congregations about sharing their lives and sharing their faith with non-believers. So they became bivocational pastors, not because they needed the money, but because they wanted to model something. One of the pastors took the most difficult job he could think of. 1 day a week, 4 days a week, or probably more. He was working for the church. 1 day a week, he decided to take a part-time job. The part-time job that he chose was cable television debt collector. Cable television debt collector. And you're thinking, why would you choose that? You have got to turn up at someone's door and tell them that because they haven't paid, they're having their cable TV chopped off. This was a few years back. This would be like going to a house and turning off someone's Wi-Fi. Some people would rather have no running water than no Wi-Fi. Cable TV had the same impact back in the day in America. And he said, well, actually, look, think about it. I want to be exposed to people that are in a really difficult moment. That their finances have fallen apart and the cable's like the last luxury they've got left. I want to be there for it. Could I do this in a humane way that demonstrate the grace and love of God? Because if I can do this here, I've got something to say to the church about being brave about your faith. I thought that was a fantastically courageous move. I'm not saying we all need to sign up for Sky TV and we'll be the debt collector service, but are there deliberate actions that you and I could take to build time in with non-Christian people? One of the things I did when I was teaching at Wycliffe Hall is I started up a men's book group at our local school. And so I sent an email around and I said, look, I'm massively into reading. If anybody else is into it as well, there's lots of opportunities. Sadly, the way that life works, that our wives and partners are often meeting at the school gate, but we're not. Is there a way we could connect? I started that book group 12 years ago, And every 6 weeks, we gather in someone's lounge and we talk about books. They're all non-fiction books. So we've read art and politics and history and science. One of the guys there, he's like was one of the world's leading astrophysicists. Another guy, he runs a sound production company. And are they Christian books? No. But they know I'm a Christian. And so they say, Krish, what do you make of all these crazy white evangelicals in America? What do you make of Donald Trump? Defend him. Defend Christianity to us. Or we're studying science. Don't you Christians all think that science is all made up and the earth's only 6,000 years old? Defend that. But actually, a lot of that conversation, we can have a trusted conversation because we've met every 6 weeks for 12 years. And we've walked together through some really difficult things. I lost my job. Another member of the group struggled with a serious health problem. Someone else lost their father recently. So month by month, we've done life together. And that's brought permission to talk about faith. What are the things that you could do so that you can model to your congregation that this gospel thing, it isn't just good on Sunday mornings when we're all robed up and singing, but actually it makes sense where people are. I was instructed when I was a pastor that the best thing you could do is to spend time with some members of your congregation in their workplace. And for those of them that were up for it, it was great. So I'd meet people for lunch, and I'd travel to wherever they were working. One guy was an optician. I said, look, can I meet you in your office, and then I'll take you out for lunch. And so I went to his office, and he introduced me. He said, look, everyone, this is my pastor. And that was difficult to tell. I didn't have a collar like you guys. I was kind of in civilian clothes. This is my pastor. And each of his staff went up to, oh, that Pete. He's a good man. He always reads his Bible in his lunch break. I'm going, really? He said, yeah. We love him. We love the way he treats customers. We love how gracious he is. I'm going, Pete, this is fantastic. And then having met his colleagues, we then had lunch together. And I said, look, what are the things that you're struggling with? What do I as a pastor need to know about your daily life? So when I'm preaching on a Sunday morning, I can equip you to be a better witness where you are day by day. I tell you, my sermons got a lot better just from those lunches. We had some great lunches. But it was really transformative to the way that we did ministry. I think the more you create a culture in your church that the gospel is true, it's defendable, nothing to be ashamed of, through testimony, through storytelling, you begin to change the way that people feel about Jesus and feel about their faith. I've been, just as I come to a close, I've been asked to use this as a way to move the slides on. Can anyone guess what brand this tablet is? Anyone guess? Apple. Have you ever met anyone that's marginally enthusiastic about an Apple product? Have you? Yeah? They call them Apple evangelists. Have you noticed that? Well, you wouldn't know this, but do you know how much training the average Apple evangelist has? Absolutely none. So why are they so full of enthusiasm about sharing how great their Apple product is? Do you know why? They genuinely believe it works. And they're proud of it. And they're not embarrassed to tell you how great the product is. They'll let you have a go at it. There's absolute confidence that you'll love it. They don't even get a cut out of the sales. What would it take for us as the church to have the same confidence that your average Apple evangelist had? Or even better, those first scared disciples stood on a mountain. What would it take? I think it would be a recovery of the greatness of Jesus, so we need to be teaching about him, an experience of the Spirit, but also they need to see it from us. I think you put those three things together and we'll have an explosive church again. Thanks for listening.